Welcome back. In the last video we covered a model of natural selection, so using a model to show how that works. In this video we're going to cover this new dot point, which says students will analyze information from secondary sources to prepare a case study to show how the environmental change can lead to a change in the species. So we have to look at a case study. And what that means is just have one example that actually happened, so we can show how environmental change, so how the environment changing, becoming more dry or more wet, how that can lead to different species or a change in the species. So that's what we're going to do now. What I'll start with is this picture here, which is a picture of the skull of a modern kangaroo. And there's two things I want to point out that we're going to cover and talk about quite a bit in this video, which are the teeth itself. So we have two different types of teeth. We've got more, but the ones I want to focus on are these ones, the sharp ones on the front, which are the incisor teeth. So these are the ones that help us eat meat, mostly, or to help us initially bite something. And then the other ones on the back, so these ones here, are called the molar teeth. And the molar teeth, they help us chew. So for example, we might eat with these teeth initially, the incisor teeth, but once we start chewing, we go to molar teeth. Right? And the modern kangaroo has really well-developed molar teeth. And their incisor teeth aren't that well developed. So molar teeth are well developed. And the reason why is because they're herbivores. And you guys might know what herbivores are. They are plant eaters. So they eat plants and plants only. So grass and other shrubs, and eat plants. So modern kangaroos are herbivores, they only eat plants, and their teeth are specialized for plant eating because what they have to do when they eat plants, they have to chew a lot to break that cellulose down. So this molar teeth will help that chewing. Right? So modern kangaroos are herbivores, and they're adapted to it by having molar teeth. Whereas the ancient kangaroos are actually something called omnivores. And omnivores are animals that eat plants, but also animals. And what I mean by animals is usually insects and with the other animals, so maybe small rats or anything. So that's often the diet of smaller omnivores, like the ancient kangaroo. So because they had to eat insects and animals quite a bit, they had to have better incisor teeth. So these incisor teeth here, the front ones, these were well developed. In ancient kangaroos, which lived about 25 million years ago, you had your incisor teeth, which were well developed. And that allowed them to eat food better, especially food that they had to eat, which was some plants, but mostly small animals and insects as well. Right? And the reason why I'm going over this is because now we're going to look at these two pictures, which is Australia 25 million years ago, and compare that to Australia today. So 25 million years ago, Australia was actually mostly bush, not mostly bush, actually mostly rainforest. So this is a picture of an Australian rainforest, which is still currently here in Australia. That is in northern Australia. But the problem is now there's only small amounts of Australia which are covered in rainforest. But 25 million years ago, you can imagine most of Australia was actually covered in rainforest. So the thing is with rainforests, you have lots of insects. You have lots of small sort of animals like mice type animals, small animals. And even though it looks like you have lots of grass, lots of trees, they're usually not that edible. So plants are a bit less nutritious. So most animals live in a nutritious, spelled that wrong, I think. Most animals that live in a rainforest environment are many of them omnivores, so they eat not just plants but also insects and animals to make sure they get enough food. So you can imagine those kangaroos that lived back then, 25 million years ago. They had to be adapted to that environment to be able to eat insects and animals properly. So because we had something called the word, bring that word back up again, the word variation. What that word variation meant was just that there was some difference in all species, so that we weren't all the same. So for example, humans, even though we're all very similar, there are still some differences within species, within us humans or within any other species as well. So for example, these kangaroos, some might have more developed incisor teeth, and some might have more developed molar teeth, even 25 million years ago. But the ones which were best suited to the environment were, in the case of 25 million years ago, the ones who had better incisor teeth, because that helped them to kill insects and animals better, and helped them to eat those better. Right? So you can imagine there would have been some that had better molar teeth that were more developed, but they wouldn't have been that well adapted, so they wouldn't have been able to reproduce that well, because their chance of survival would have been less. Whereas these ones which had good incisor teeth would have been really good in terms of their survival chance. So most of the kangaroos back then would have had these well-developed incisor teeth. But then today, because the environment changed, Australia became a lot drier. So Australia became a lot drier. Became a lot dry. I think that's how you spell it. Australia became a lot drier, and because it became a lot drier, also the actual food availability changed a lot as well. And now we have a lot more grass. So grass and bushland, and less insects, less small animals for the kangaroos to eat. So this is a typical Australian sort of scenery. Got your bushland, your grass, and maybe a kangaroo hopping around as well. So for any non-Australian viewers, this is normal in Australia. But if you go to Sydney, you're not going to see random kangaroos jumping around. They're in the outback, in the bush, not close to us. So most of Australia is this bushland, but yeah, the food availability is very different. So now we have more grass, more bushland, which means that the kangaroos that were to survive, if you have that small variation again, if you have molar teeth kangaroos and incisor teeth, now the ones who have incisor teeth would be less likely to survive. They would be less likely to survive because they have less animals to eat, so they would be starting to die out. Whereas the ones who have molar teeth, the ones who can eat grass well, they would be able to reproduce more and more. So molar teeth allows grass eating, but more effective grass as well. So there's lots of grass, so these molar teeth kangaroos are now predominant. So the majority of our kangaroos we have today are ones which have really well developed molar teeth. They still have the incisor teeth, but they're not as well developed. Whereas 25 million years ago, it would have been very different. Most of the kangaroos would have had the incisor teeth, more developed than the molar teeth. And the reason why is because they had to eat insects and animals, and that would allow, incisor teeth would allow better chewing of those animals compared to molar teeth, right? So that's how, prepare a case study to show how environmental change can lead to change in the species. So our environment has changed. It's gone from rainforest-like to bush-like, and that means that the food availability has also changed. So insects, small animals going from that 25 million years ago to mostly grass and bushland. And that has caused nature to select the ones which were most adapted. 25 million years ago, that was the incisor teeth kangaroos, which had incisor teeth really well developed, whereas today that's your molar teeth kangaroo because they're more adapted to the bushland. So I hope that was useful.